Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. Throughout my life, it has been very rare that a book will actually move me to tears, but when it does, it really does. Only 4 novels have ever had this sort of impact on me. Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, From Sheer Joy, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, for what I'm sure are probably obvious reasons by now, and Kate DiCamello's The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, for both a bit of sadness and hope. The 4th I am going to discuss here today, for its evocative honesty in the midst of its relentless anguish. I'm going to talk about A Monster Calls, released in 2007 and recommended for readers age 12 and up. A Monster Calls tells the story of Connor, a 13-year-old boy living in present-day Britain. Ever since his mother was diagnosed with a terrible illness, implied to be cancer due to the descriptions of hair loss and the treatments that sap all her energy, Connor has been suffering from constant nightmares, or rather, a single nightmare over and over again, involving a black creature with long tentacles and glowing eyes that threaten to paralyze and suffocate him. One night, however, to Connor's great surprise, he wakes up to find another kind of monster, this one very real and very different, seeming to be made up of branches that, according to a passage on page 5, twist around one another, always creaking, always groaning, and thin needle-like leaves weaving together to make a green furry skin that moves and breathes as if there were muscles and lungs underneath. This new monster claims to be the very spirit of the earth, most often taking the form of a yew tree. More to the point, it claims that it was summoned by Connor himself, yet the latter can't recall such a thing. The reason for its coming, says the monster, is to heal Connor, from what Connor has no idea, but in order to do so, the monster must tell Connor 3 stories from his past travels across the lands of the world, after which Connor will be commanded to tell the monster a 4th story in turn, a truth that he has been denying, and that he would rather die than admit to anyone. Though this novel was written by Chaos Walking Trilogy author Patrick Ness, the idea for it was conceived by Shaban Daoud, writing activist and author of 4 young adult novels. She was unfortunately diagnosed with severe terminal breast cancer, and on August 21, 2007, passed away at the age of 47 before she could develop the idea further. After she died, Ness was contacted by Daoud's Walker Books editor, Denise Johnstone Burt, who had previously worked with both writers, though the two had never met personally, to put Daoud's story to paper. To this day, A Monster Calls is the only book whose creators have been awarded both the Carnegie and Kate Greenway medals, Ness for literature and Jim Kay for illustration, respectively. For anyone seeing this book for the first time, it would be very easy to believe that it is a horror or suspense story. That's what I believed at first, and not only because of its title. According to the biography at the back of the book, Kay, quote, used everything from beetles to breadboards to create interesting marks and textures, unquote. Indeed, many of the pictures have a very harsh, scratchy look to them, especially the monster itself, with its thousands of dense clusters of branches and twigs, making it appear all the more wild and imposing, just like nature and the land it embodies and represents. The sky and other environments throughout often appear blotted or streaked, like either a terrible storm is brewing and just waiting to unleash its wrath, or the sky itself is as miserable as the characters in the story and just as unable or unwilling to shed its tears. In many scenes, Connor is often depicted as a white silhouette against almost complete blackness, whether it be the monster, his nightmare, or even sometimes the real world. symbolizing, at least to me, how the worst aspects of Connor's reality continually threaten to overwhelm what parts of himself remain and swallow him up. No human faces are ever visually depicted, but on the rare occasion that eyes are shown, like those of the monster or some animal, they are always completely white, with no pupils, and either cold and unpredictable or dull and inert. While this story certainly is frightening to an extent, it is less so in the sense of devilish horror than of pure despair. From Connor's point of view, the reader gets the sense that he feels he's the only one who has any faith that his mother will eventually recover, fueling the seemingly justified bitterness that Connor harbors within his heart. While he believes and wishes for his mother's life more than anything, it is as though the rest of his family is simply giving up and moving on with their own lives while wanting Connor to be brave or talk about what's going to happen. His divorced father, for instance, is remarried with another child and living in America, which in itself is painful. But there are also some particularly excruciating moments, like when his new American habits present themselves, namely the annoying tendency to call Connor childish names like champ and sport, as seen from a shortened passage on pages 86 through 88. "How you hanging in there, champ?" his father asked him while they waited for the waitress to bring them their pizzas. "Champ?" Connor asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "Sorry," his father said, smiling bashfully. "America is almost a whole different language. Your sister's doing well. Almost walking." "Half-sister," Connor said. "I can't wait for you to meet her," his father said. "We'll have to arrange for a visit soon, maybe even this Christmas. Would you like that?" Connor ran a hand along the edge of the table. "So it'd be just a visit, then?" "What do you mean?" his father asked, sounding surprised. "A visit as opposed to—" He trailed off, and Connor knew he had worked out what he meant. But Connor suddenly didn't want him to finish. Connor's grandmother is shown to be unnaturally modern, businesslike, and independent, treating Connor less like a grandson than just a problem to be dealt with like anything else on a daily basis, as shown on page 39. Connor's grandma wasn't like other grandmas. He'd met Lily's grandma loads of times, and she was how grandmas were supposed to be, crinkly and smiley, with white hair and the whole lot. She cooked meals where she made 3 separate, eternally boiled vegetable portions for everybody, and would giggle in the corner at Christmas with a small glass of sherry and a paper crown on her head. Connor's grandma wore tailored pantsuits, dyed her hair to keep out the gray, and said things that made no sense at all, like, 60 is the new 50, or classic cars need the most expensive polish. What did that even mean? She emailed birthday cards, would argue with waiters over wine, and still had a job. Her house was even worse, filled with expensive old things you could never touch, like a clock she wouldn't even let the cleaning lady dust, which was another thing. What kind of grandma had a cleaning lady? 2 sugars, no milk, she called from the sitting room as Connor made the tea, as if he didn't know that from the last 3,000 times she visited. Going back to the monster, Connor is not at all fearful of it at first, and is highly skeptical of its purpose behind its storytelling, but the monster is quick to tell him otherwise, on page 35. Connor blinked, then blinked again. "You're going to tell me stories?" "Indeed," the monster said. "Well—" Connor looked around in disbelief. "How is that a nightmare?" "Stories are the wildest things of all. the monster rumbled. Stories chase and bite and hunt. While the monster's stories may have simple fairy tale-like beginnings, the characters within and their actions and justifications prove to be far more complicated than Connor ever expected, not unlike himself, as the monster ultimately teaches him through pain, love, and personal reflection. In spite of all the apparent lifelessness that permeates this book, life itself is perhaps its most powerful theme, not only the kind that dictates the natural world, but the kind that defines and is defined by humanity as a whole, how we actually live as opposed to how we merely think. Shown on page 191, "You were merely wishing for the end of pain," the monster said. "Your own pain. It is the most human wish of all." "I didn't mean it," Connor said. "You did," the monster said, "but you also did not." Connor sniffed and looked up to its face, which was as big as a wall in front of him. "How can both be true?" "The answer is that it does not matter what you think," the monster said, "because your mind will contradict itself 100 times each day. Your mind will believe comforting lies while also knowing the painful truths that make those lies necessary, and your mind will punish you for believing both." "But how do you fight it?" Connor asked, his voice rough. "How do you fight all the different stuff inside?" "By speaking the truth," the monster said. I have not had the pleasure of reading any works from Dowd or Ness, but I can definitely see how they both came to be so beloved in the literary world. I believe I can honestly say that Ness did Dowd and her final idea justice with this hauntingly beautiful tale. This will likely resonate most with those who have had to suffer the emotionally raw and complex pain of losing a loved one, especially when that loss is prolonged but ultimately inevitable. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.